and let her go ahead and get started. So here we go, Renee. We can't wait to hear from you.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. It sounds like I made a good choice by leaving the Chicago area weather. I am originally from Darien, Illinois, so I went to Hinsdale South High School. I graduated in 2015, and then I went to Indiana University for 4 years. I majored in computer science. I did not start majoring in computer science, so I did switch over. And then my after my freshman year, I had an internship in Chicago with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Group. I was doing IT with them. They're primarily a business company, so tech was not the focus, but tech was a big part of their business. I took the train in with my dad every day. That was kind of fun. And then the following summer, so after my sophomore year of school, worked an internship in Mountain View, California, which is prime Silicon Valley. And I worked at Google, and I was on an internal team. It's called Alkali. There's no reasoning that I could understand why it was called Alkali, so I cannot speak to that. But it was really fun. We built a web platform for building really quick web apps within Google. And I learned a lot during that internship. It was also primarily focused at freshmen and sophomore undergrads in college who had taken 1 to 2 computer science classes and thought that they wanted an internship in tech. And it was heavily guided. So a normal internship is like you working with a team and maybe having some kind of sub project on it. At least that's how it was for me at Google. This one was more you on your team, but there's also a partner intern with you in the same program. You're both working on one project together. So it's a very collaborative experience. And then you have 2 hosts, which are kind of like your managers that help answer your questions and help you with your project. So then after that internship, I went back the following summer and I was in San Francisco with Google Cloud Platform. And that was a normal internship. So it's just called software engineering internship. And I worked on specifically the search bar on Google Cloud Platform. So if you ever use the search bar and drop it down to a filter, I made that filter. That was really fun. And I learned a lot in that internship too, and had a lot more responsibility and independence, which was a interesting like look forward to what full-time would be. Not the full experience of full-time, but definitely a bigger step than the previous internship. And then I graduated school in 2019, and I started work in September of 2019 full-time in Boulder, Colorado. That's where I am right now. And I work on the Street View apps team. Many people don't know that Street View has its own app separate from Maps. It's not very popular, but it has like a good user base and very dedicated user base. The Android version is much more, we keep that one more up to date than the iOS version. And I could talk about that a little bit later, why we make those decisions on what apps to really invest in. But it's Street View, if you don't know, is when you go into the Google Maps and you look at the layer where you're like, can see photos as if you're walking along the street. We work on the app that helps people contribute photos. And there's multiple ways that people can contribute. Probably the most famous one is the Street View car, where those big cars that say Street View on them and have a massive camera on them and a bunch of sensors drive around, and they take really high quality imagery. But there's also something that we call Google Street View Lite, where we pay other people and send them maybe like 360 cameras to go walk around their area on an area that we told them to, and that all that imagery is like owned by Google. We just don't send a car because cars are really expensive, and a lot of places have inaccessible roads that like are not in the U.S. or this area, so it's a lot cheaper for us to get like not as good as the imagery as the cars, but still pretty good. And then my team specifically is focusing on user Street View, so that's anybody like you, me, anybody can take their phone or get themselves a 360 camera like a GoPro and take Street View and add it that way. That is owned by the user, but by like giving it to us, you agree that like we can use it. And that's it's a kind of like crowdsourcing imagery to get even more places that we can't get our cars to. I work in Java a lot, but I'm also like have to work in a lot of different languages. But it's super fun. And then that was just like a little bit of my background on what I'm working on now, but you guys feel free to ask any questions that you have around that. That's just like a quick little summary of what I do and why I do it. Yeah, you could just like jump into the chat whenever you want to.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So earlier you said you were working in IT. And so my question is, what do you think about IT certifications? Because recently, like over winter break, I bought some books, some CompTIA books, and I started like self-studying for these certifications because I'm really passionate about, computer science and IT. So I wonder what's your take on these certifications for that field?
I haven't actually like done any of the certifications. I have heard good things about them, and it's like a good and like fast way to get start doing what you want to do. I don't have like that strong of an opinion on them, but IT in general is like a good field to be in. I was on it on the business side, and I learned that I didn't want to do that for my own like personal reasons, but I don't know that much about the certification programs.
I have a question.
Yep.
So I recently heard a news story about Google. There was a union formed at Google. And it's like an ethical union, which is pretty different. Like, I was just wondering how you felt about that and how you felt like about ethical unions in emerging in the technology world.
Sure. So I learned about that union when it came out on the news as well. I think it was about 400 employees. There's like over 100,000 employees at Google. And there have been some talks about joining it. I, again, don't know that much about it. I feel very well treated as an employee at Google. And I'm sure there are groups that are not well represented. But I don't have like a strong opinion on that. It's like I said, it's a small group, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I feel very respected and well compensated at Google. Any other questions?
Yeah, so you said that you kept the Android version more updated. Why is that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different roles at Google, and one of them is product manager. And that role can be very different depending on the company, how much responsibility they have and how much say they have. And they're in charge of the direction and the success or the failure of a product. So most teams will have a product manager. And they think of the business sense. Does this make sense to introduce this feature? What's the cost of this feature? What are the benefits? Like, where can it fail? And they ultimately guide the direction of the product. Our product, like the Street View app, is so niche. I guess it has such a niche market. It's really for people that want to contribute on a more like, you really have to be dedicated to contribute Street View. It's not just a, hey, are these hours correct kind of update on maps. So Android has significantly more users globally than iOS does, than Apple does. So, and Google owns Android, so it's like we're working within our own like environment ecosystem. So the Android phone or the Android app, we keep more up to date just because we have a larger user base on it. And a lot of the areas that we want Street View in, well, pre-pandemic, a lot of the areas that we wanted Street View in were areas that didn't have Street View already, which were what we call next billion user countries, which means like we already have apps that have a billion users on them or multiple billion users, but there's developing countries or countries that are just coming onto the global market now that have a lot of important data, but don't use Apple they're not major Apple users. So the Android app is the most beneficial for our use case. Whereas though like Google Maps has both surfaces because they have enough users on both to warrant that. But we do have, my team does maintain the iOS app. We just don't have like dedicated iOS developers. I think there's one person on my team who's kind of in charge on just kind of like keeping it running. So when Apple tells us that like we need to change certain things, like I know privacy labels are coming out so that people can get like snapshots of how an app uses your privacy. It's kind of like nutrition labels. Like we have to do that to keep our app in the App Store, but that's about all we do right now.
I have a question. So what like specific parts on the app have you worked on? Or like it's just like everything?
Do you have the app? Do you have an Android on the app?
I do have I don't have the app, but I have like the
Cool.
Android phone.
So if you ever have like free time, feel free to explore it. We just did, I don't know what percentage released it is yet, but we just did a major app update on how it looks. So I work on a lot of front end stuff generally. My most recent project actually is front end and back end, but we completely changed like how the app looks. So it's some major changes, as well as added a new feature, which is I think either all the way released or maybe about like 50% of users have it, but it's been released to the press, so I can talk about it. It's called Connected Photos, and it's instead of you could just take your phone and walk and take a video, and it creates Street View from that. Not the 360 version; they're like flat. But that's the biggest thing we've been working on the past year is releasing that and getting that in order. But throughout the redesign, I've touched a lot of parts of the app. So like the search bar, a lot of the menus, a lot of small things.
Cool.
What does your typical workday look like now, and what did it look like before COVID?
Great questions. So I'm completely work from home until September, at least. That's what they said. And so the only thing that's really changed, this is a really good job to do remotely. My role hasn't changed at all. It's just how social I am has changed with my team, or just become, just had to be different. So typically like I'd go into the office and then just do things, but there's a lot of emails like any job. There are a lot of meetings. So that could be strategy meetings, like what are we planning for the next quarter or year or half a year, and just organizing our goals with what work we're actually doing. Or it could just be a meeting about like a specific feature that we're thinking about implementing. Most of my job is programming or coding. I'm an entry level like engineer, so that's basically what you do is like you get projects and you code them. But it's not my whole job, which I was kind of surprised about. There is a good chunk that is designing what I'm going to do, and then getting that reviewed. And that means designing both. Sometimes it's like user experience or user interface designing, so how it looks. And sometimes it's just what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. There's a lot of ways to do the same thing, and they all have their own costs and benefits. So it's figuring out the best one that makes the most sense. So that's usually writing up a document, or sometimes if you have an idea, there'll be like a concept document. I'm sorry, this is, 1 second. Sorry, this is my not my laptop, so somebody else's notifications. Yeah, so it can be a concept doc, which is like, I have this idea in very general, you don't need any implementation details, or a design doc where you have to talk about the actual technologies you're going to use and how you're going to implement it. It's very specific. So that sometimes takes up my time. And then other than that, so it's mainly designing, coding, or being in meetings.
How did you go about getting the Google internship in college?
Yeah, so at my first internship, there was a Women in Tech conference, and one of the moderators was an employee at Google. She was in HR at Google, and she was at my table, and I just was like, hey, Google sounds really cool. At that point, I had decided that I did not like my internship, just because I didn't like the business aspect of it at that specific company. And I wanted to work for a tech company and see what that would be like. So I asked her if I could get a tour of the Chicago office. And she gave me a tour. She was very nice. She gave me a tour and introduced me to another woman engineer who told me about the program for undergraduate students. And that was how I got it. I had to interview. It was 2 phone interviews. They were pretty basic because I was young and didn't know that much, but they were from 2 different engineers. So one called from Boston and another called from, I think, Mountain View. And they could not tell me if I got anything right, but they were very helpful. The interview process at Google is known to be pretty intense, and the problems are difficult, but they really don't care if you get the right answer. It's obviously a bonus, but they really want to know how you work through a problem, because that tells a lot about how you're going to be as an employee. Most of the hard like data structure questions, they know you're gonna learn in college, and or in high school even, and they might ask you to implement them, but I've never implemented like a full algorithm that I've learned, because they're already done at a company this big, so you just kind of have those tools already, and it's expected knowledge. But yeah, you talk out loud during the interview, which is something that you could practice. Even if you're just thinking out loud, that's extremely beneficial. You can ask them questions during it, and they can help guide you a little bit, or they can, so if you're kind of going off track, they can let you know that like maybe you should think about this answer, or like, have you thought about this? And that's super helpful. But I had those 2 interviews and then got the internship, and then I actually never had to interview again, because once I had the internship, they had already invested a lot of time and money into me, so they wanted to keep hiring me. So I did well during the internships, and that was good enough feedback to get the next internship and then get the full-time offer. It's kind of like a 3-month interview, I guess the internship is for full-time, or the next one. But yeah, a lot of it was talk to people and figure out what they do, and if you like what they do. That people generally want to help other people, so it's good to ask for help, and ask for like opportunities, because that's how I got mine.
All right, Jack, and then Manas.
So I have a question about college, and my question is, should you like load up on like computer science workload, or would you rather have like free time to do like independent projects? Like, what should a CS like undergrad should like study for to
Sure.
get into computer science? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different approaches. I took probably like a very average approach. I took a lot of classes. I did not do any individual projects, which I know they say like you definitely should do. But I really valued like my free time as well as like learning. So I was like very dedicated to my classes. I took electives. And then I guess the one thing that I did outside of class, it was still computer science, was I joined like a it was still for credit, so it counted, but I did it more for fun, was a nonprofit that helped other nonprofits in the area do their tech needs. That was super beneficial. Both like the technical work was like pretty average. It was just a lot of them just needed websites. But it was just learning how to work with a team, learning how to work with a client was very important. And that's ended up being a big part of my job now, even though like there are technical aspects. A lot of it is communication with your team, communication with, I mean, your client being like your product manager or your users. Those are really important skills. Again, you're going to get a good education if you go to school. That's like a given. So just if you're passionate, is that side project, do that side project. If you're really interested in classes, like there's not a wrong answer on those ones. Yeah, just pursuing, like I always took one fun class each semester that had nothing to do with my major. And then I also studied abroad and did 0 computer science studying abroad. I don't think I got any valuable credit, which I don't recommend doing. But I had taken a lot of AP classes in high school, so I had a lot of extra credit. There was a message in the chat I saw.
Also, I know Manas had a question. He had his hand up as well.
Sure. Yeah, we'll answer that one first.
Yeah, so just going back to like the stuff you talked about, like interviewing, you said they don't really care about you getting the right answer, but rather like the process in which it goes through. So like having worked at Google and done their interview, like what exactly are they looking for in their interview in you?
Yeah, so I actually am interview trained, so I can give interviews. So I have a different insight as well. They obviously want you to know what you're talking about. So like you should know your stuff, like know your data structures, know your algorithms, know the cost of things. But I would say overall, just be able to show that you can work through a problem. A lot of it is problem solving. And that's why so many employees come here from a non-traditional computer science background. A lot still do come from computer science, but you'll talk to a bunch of employees that came from something else, and they just have really good communication and technical, like they're able to work through problems and show that they can. So they're really just looking for somebody that if you get stuck, you don't just like sit there the entire interview thinking to yourself. That's not helpful for them or you. It makes it kind of like an awkward interview. And you can ask for help. You can think about the small things too. So a good thing to kind of buy yourself time at the beginning of an interview while you're figuring out how you want to solve it is think of test cases that you might have to answer. And just the fact that you're thinking about testing before you even start programming is a benefit to like you. It'll only help you out, and it can help you also understand the problem better, like what they're asking you, instead of just diving in trying to find the solution. And there might be small nuances that you need to think about for certain questions. So yeah, it's really good to just practice whiteboarding if you have something or any form of that, and just talking it out. I know a bunch of interns during my first summer would get a meeting room and just give each other practice questions, interview questions, and just practice talking them out and writing. Yeah, and then there's other platforms too. I know, like online platforms, especially during like COVID, to use that interviewers use, and just get familiar with that platform. You don't want to be like figuring out the platform as you're trying to also answer a difficult question. Oh, go ahead. Somebody have something? Okay, I had a message that said, what were some of the most helpful CS classes you took in college? That one internship, kind of an internship with a nonprofit, was very helpful in communication styles, not super technical focused. My specialization, my program had like specializations. They were I was artificial intelligence and data science. So all those classes were interesting, but I also took classes outside of that, still in computer science. So I took like a systems one that was interesting to learn how like the computer worked and like read stuff. And obviously the most beneficial were just the beginning classes because it got me really excited for computer science, as well as taught me the basics. I took an AP class in high school, but honestly did not learn much. So I came in just kind of fresh and I learned a lot there. And it was not that, it was just my teacher was really bad. So in high school. So that was more that than I still liked it. I still had a passion for it because I went into it. But I came in as well as many other students in my intro class, very just not knowing anything, and everybody did well. Exactly. So yeah, those are the most helpful ones. They're really, really interesting classes. Again, it's kind of just like, even if you're on a certain track or specialization and there's something that finds interesting, like take that class. You never know where, like what you might end up doing with that. Yeah. Another question, what is the culture like at Google? Google's culture, I think, is one of the cultures that's like probably most well known, just because there's been like movies about it and stuff. But I would say it's very friendly, very open. It is a really big company, so there are obviously areas that are different. Like, but the overall experience is the people that I work with are really smart and very helpful. And really ambitious, which is what I like. The perks are really good. The perks are food, which I can never, like, it's a great one, as well as like just a lot of flexibility. I never feel bad for, there's a good work-life balance. So I never feel bad for turning off my laptop at 5 p.m. Some people obviously will work later, some people will work less. COVID has been really hard on parents, I know, because they have children who are students, and Google's been very good with allowing parents to take carers leave so they can homeschool their children during this time, as well as there's like mental health days that we can take that don't count as sick days or don't count as like paid time off days that we have to use up. We could just take them if we need them. We get a lot of cool swag, which is nice, but generally the culture, it depends. There's different organizations at Google. So there's, I'm in the Geo one, which includes maps, and Google's a massive company. And the culture of each organization or product area is a little bit different. And that is something that you can ask about when you are figuring out what team you want to be on, is like, does this team's culture fit me? But I've generally found all my teams were really supportive, very helpful, and a variety of people, different backgrounds and ages, and it's been really cool. Did you ever have any hardships as a woman in STEM during college? Great question. I have been super fortunate, and I haven't had any kind of like in your face moments, or like not that many, but there definitely are times when like I would be in classes, especially the more like hardware oriented classes, or yeah, just like more technical classes, where I was one of 3 women of 70 students. And I honestly didn't notice it until people would point it out to me. And I would notice that the women often asked fewer questions, just were a little bit more quiet, even though they might have been doing the best in the class oftentimes. So I also had a really good mentor in college, who was my first computer science professor, and she was amazing, and she really advocated for women. So it's a lot about helping people, kind of like just reaching out for opportunities, like helping people along the way. And she wrote all my recommendation letters. She was always there for help. And then at Google, I am one of 2 women on my 5-person team. So not a perfect ratio, but my manager's a woman, my director's a woman, and my VP of engineering is a woman, which is not normal for tech. And I really like that culture. It's, again, very supportive. And Google has really fun ways of making sure that like people are included. Like they have a Chrome extension that you could add to your meetings to see how much you're talking in a meeting. And if you're talking a lot, it lets you know that like you should probably let somebody else talk, which has been helpful. And then they just have like posters around the office of like, here's how you can be more inclusive. But like I said, I haven't had any terrible experiences, but I do know people who, women who have like had bad experiences in tech. Generally not at Google though. It's not where it should be, but it's actively trying to get there. Next question. Did you have a choice in which department you worked in at Google? Yes and no. It's different by office. If you go to their headquarters in Mountain View, you have a lot more options because I think there's like 30 or 40,000 employees there. So it's kind of like a college campus. And that's what they'll have most of their teams. Boulder is a smaller office. There's about 3,000 employees there, which is a lot of employees, but small compared to their headquarters. So there's not as many teams to choose from. But when I decided I wanted to be in Boulder, I filled out a preference form, what I've worked on, what I'm interested in working on, and a preference of what product area I wanted to be in. And then they sat in the room with all the applications that had been accepted, and like this is like the directors, so they're pretty high up, and they know what teams have needs for, and then what people are available, and they matched us up. And I got what I wanted, so I did not push back, but I'm pretty sure if I had been extremely unhappy, they could have placed me somewhere else. Let's see. I'm kind of interested in front-end /UI development. What is your ideation process when developing the front-end aspect of the application? Great question. Google is a huge data-first company. So, the main goal is making money and making users happy. So all of our UI changes come from user-based research. So there's a role where you could just be a user experience researcher. You conduct experiments. There's already a lot of existing data on UI stuff that works and does not work, as well as Google and Geo specifically have guidelines that they go by, like a branding kind of. So it's pretty easy to stay within that branding. And then my team has a UX designer whose whole job is to design stuff for us and make it look really nice, because I can generally do a nice mock-up, but that is not my role. I was not trained in that, and I'm just not as good as he is. And the biggest things are like, does this work for the user? Is it clear for the user? Are they like, we don't want them to be confused with what's happening. It should be very intuitive. And we also go through accessibility checks. So we have one engineer that's whole job is checking to make sure that things are accessible. So like buttons are the right size, that are easy to be clicked, colors have enough contrast so that they can easily be seen with people with like visual impairments. Yeah, there's a lot of different factors, and there's oftentimes not one right answer either. So sometimes we try things and we release it as like an experiment to some people and see if that increases user like happiness or use just more users or anything. So it's a trial and error with some guided research basically. But because my app does not have as many users as Maps, we can try a lot of more fun things without as much kind of red tape from being such a big app that with over 1 billion users. Let's see. Do you see yourself moving around different departments within Google? Yes and no. It's really easy to change teams as well. Like it's kind of just like internal job postings, and you talk to your manager, and then you talk to the manager of the other team and figure out if it's a good fit. I really like Geo's mission, and I think that's a big part of the job for me. Is like I want to like what I'm working towards. Geo's mission is like map the world and make it like universally accessible for everybody. And I really resonated with that message. The Boulder office also has a big group of Drive, like Google Drive teams, as well as Google Payments. So those are like other options. But right now I'm very happy in Geo. I like the culture of Geo, and I like the work I'm doing. But I could definitely see myself moving locations before I move to teams. But yeah. And then I also, we can talk about the release process. I know that we talked about that. I'm actually in charge of the next release, so this is perfect timing. But we release our app on a 6-week cadence, and there's a lot of structure involved in that to make it really easy, but also make sure all the boxes are checked. So we cut a branch of the current, like what the current state of the app is. We go through accessibility testing. There's really like right now there's no picking like specifically what's in it. It's what features are like coming up that are going to be completed in that time. We don't have hard deadlines on anything right now. And then all of that has to go through, legal has to look at it and make sure that it doesn't violate anything that we said that we wouldn't violate. It's like data consumption. Privacy has to look at it, kind of same thing. And it's really just a streamlined process to get that released, but it's not that difficult. This is my first time doing it, so I'm learning as I go. But yeah, we release it first to the fish food channel. There's fish food is fish food, dog food, and then like production. Fish food is very small group of people get that release and they could test it for us and use it. Dog food is a bigger pool, so there might be like 100 people in fish food and 1,000 people in dog food. Again, it's just for in case anything breaks during that release. We want to catch it early on and not push it to production before then, because that could be bad. It could be bad for users. And and then we would slowly, incrementally release it to production. So it starts at 1%, and then it goes to 10%, and then 50% and 100. Each time checking along the way that like nothing's breaking, it's still usable. Before that though, there is a lot of testing on a lot of different devices. Benefit of iOS is that they're a very closed ecosystem for operating systems. So they only have a couple devices to check on. They cut off what like OS version is out pretty early. So they only have like a handful of things to test on. Android has a lot of different phones, and each manufacturer kind of implements their own parts of it that can make it a little tricky. So it's definitely more difficult testing on Android devices, but we have a whole locker back at the office just of like all of the different Android phones. And then our engineer that tests everything will test it on all the devices on all the different OS levels, just to see if anything's broken or if it looks weird. And then sometimes we'll decide like not to support some features in different levels of the OS. Let's see. Since a fairly large amount of work is updating the app, do operating system updates make your job harder? Yes. Not terribly. There's just, iOS is definitely harder because we don't work in that code base a lot. So you not only have to do something maybe really small, but you just have never looked in the code in like a year. So it's hard to like orient yourself. And Android, we get pretty early updates of what's going to be changing, and they'll like let us know what we have to fix. It's not extremely painful for either. It's just added on top of whatever you're already working. So it could make it a little bit more difficult, but they're usually not massive changes. Let's see. How do you know if the app is breaking? Do you get reports if the app has failures? So yes, so we have many ways for feedback from the app. If you think something's broken, you personally as a user could send in feedback and say like, this is breaking. We also have a lot of monitoring. So all of our builds we have constantly running, and if something's being broken, we will be alerted. We have one person on the team every 2 weeks that's on call. So if something breaks, it's their responsibility to fix it or figure out what it is. Sometimes that is undoing a change that was done, and sometimes it's fixing a change that was done. But yeah, we have reports and then one dedicated person to figure that out, as well as logging in the app. So you could always check the logs and see what specifically is breaking. How much time is dedicated to debugging? A lot. A lot of the things we build end up having bugs. It's just what happens. You don't expect it to operate differently for different people. And debugging is an essential part of working it out. Even if I know what I have to do, there's always something that I forgot or it's new to me. I didn't not do Android development in school, so I'm still fairly new to it. I use print line debugging, which is not efficient, but Android Studio has really good debugging tools that some of my coworkers use. Out of curiosity, what language or languages is this app programmed in? Are there any Google-wide language standards? Android is in Java. That is pretty consistent throughout our app. We have discussed using Kotlin, which we might, but most of our app is maybe 10 years old, so most of it would have to change. So we kind of like sticking in Java. It's basic. There's no Google-wide language. It's generally just whatever your team decided on at one point to go forward with. For example, the Google Maps app is in Java, but their XML files, so like their layout files, they didn't think that there was sufficient amount of support for what they needed to do, so they made their own language and like make it in that. So that's why it's really hard for us to make changes in the Maps app because it's similar but different enough where we have to kind of get used to it. So that's always fun. I worked in like JavaScript or TypeScript when I worked on the Google Cloud team. I have some employees who work in Go, which is a Google specific programming language. Can be used outside, but it was developed at Google. I worked in Objective-C for iOS, so there's no standard. It's kind of just like, do you know how to learn a language? Cool, go learn that and code in it. Let's see. If you have to switch languages, do you have to recode the whole thing, or is there an easier way? Switch languages in the app, we would probably just piecemeal it together. So some of it would be Kotlin, some of it would be Java, which would work totally fine. They're interchangeable. But one of the things that stopped us from doing that is that not everybody on the team knows Kotlin, and it could be more time consuming to send. All of our code has to be reviewed by other engineers. So you make a change, you send it to somebody who has reviewing power, and they'll like point out misspellings that you made or better ways to do something, or like maybe why that way wouldn't work. It's if they're constantly switching between two different languages in one review, it makes it a lot more difficult, and could add time onto just a simple change. So that's been the biggest factor of us not changing, but it could be like multiple languages in one app. Do you think that Google or just all apps in general should have one universal language to make things easier? I think it just depends on the engineer's preference. It's obviously easier if it's all in one, but sometimes different languages make it easier to do certain things and have benefits that another one doesn't. So I don't really have a preference on that. It's really what's most efficient for the team going forward too. What's the advantage of using Kotlin? Kotlin has some powerful tools. It's just like built up like a level on Java. So it just like does some things behind the scenes that you don't need to. It's a lot less code to do the same things. That's like, it's a lot more efficient, which is a big argument for it that my team is using. And then it has some fun like coroutine kind of things to make, it just makes it easier. Java is very wordy, and that's the biggest advantage of using Kotlin. I'm all out of questions if anybody has any more. None? Oh, there we go. Oh, the antitrust lawsuit. Y'all are asking the hard questions. I really wish I had more like of like a juicy opinion for you guys, but like I don't. Google's big and there are pros and cons, I guess. For example, like Maps has the same like leader, I guess. Like I think he's a director or vice president as search and ads, which like could be problematic, but also is really helpful when you're trying to use each other's features because you're all like in the same company. So we can like share code, we can share just a lot of stuff. It just makes it easier. But yeah, I don't have a major opinion on the antitrust law. It'll be interesting. I will listen and pay attention, but it doesn't affect me, which is kind of like sounds bad, but Google, like I keep saying this, but Google is so big. So like when management changes above me, it usually doesn't affect my day-to-day job.
Yeah, I have another question. So specifically with working on a team, I understand that everyone is different. Everyone has their own code styles.
Mhm.
So do you have certain standardizations in place to ensure that it works, that when you like piece the code together, they work cohesively?
Yes, yeah. So we have style guides on each language has a Google specific style guide. And sometimes that's just the same as the Android one because we release it externally as well. But so there's like the greater thing of like, this is how we accept it, this language should be written. And then there's team specifics. So my team might decide to use one type of data structure over another consistently, or or like add logging in specific ways or do tests this specific way. And that is all documented. We have like a team website page that you can like look that like as a developer, I could look that up and say like, okay, my team does testing this way, so I will do testing that way. Also, one of the biggest ways that I learn how to do something is looking at how somebody else did it. So we have access to all of Google's code at once. So if I'm like, I need to add this line on this page, I have no idea how to do it. Somebody's probably already done it or done something very similar. And then I look at their example and can adapt it to my own. So you can learn from your team's codes or other team's code. Let's see. What does communication look like between you and your UX developer? Oftentimes it's an engineer, a UX developer, and a product manager, who the product manager says, I want to add this feature. And the engineer said, cool, I'll code it. But what should it look like? And the UX developer will give you like options, and engineers actually have a pretty good, like, they can say what they want to the UX designer, or yeah, and they will take that into effect. It's not like it has to be this way, like you have to code it this way, like no matter what. You can be like, well, what about this option? And I've proposed many designs myself to our UX designer, and they ended up like making it into the app. So it's really like you iterate on the designs together and talk about different options, because you as an engineer know more of the technical side. The product manager knows more of like what the user wants or what they want the direction to go. And the UX designer has like, yeah, there's no way like this is intuitive for the user or something like that. So it's a very collaborative process. Let's see, any funny stories that happened in your time at Google? There's probably a lot. I haven't been in the office in so long that I can't really remember what it looks like. But something that happened last year, which was kind of funny, we had a dog Super Bowl at the office. So everybody brought their dogs in, and my team had like 6 dogs at our workstation that day. And that was really fun. And then they got the dogs in jerseys and had them walk around the courtyard and kind of play football, but not really. Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff that happens. There's a group of people that play spike ball outside all the time. There's a secret room in the Boulder office that you can go into, and if you're in it, like you can't tell that somebody's in it when you approach it, and it's very tiny. It's just one seat, so it's very private. But it has like a hobbit hole door, and there's a sign on it, and nobody flips the sign over to say that they're in it. So I've like walked in on many meetings that people have had on those, so that's a little awkward sometimes, but nothing crazy that I can think of. What do you use to communicate and develop? Do you use Slack and GitHub? Or are there other tools that you rely on? So we use Google products in all the things we do. So this is not my laptop because I cannot use Zoom on my laptop. We use Google Video Chat or Meet. Yeah, I think it's called Meets externally. We message with the Hangouts chat, whatever your chat is in Gmail. We use one of Google's many chat apps. We have used that, and we chat pretty often. Some open source teams use GitHub, but my team is not open source, so we use our own code repository called Google 3. And we use a lot of internal tools. So you can use Android Studio. I use an online internal like web IDE called Cider. And then we have code reviews through our own tools as well. Are you required to use Google Apps to communicate? It's just generally easier. It's kind of like if you were at an organization that used like Office 360 as their like main email and like full Office suite, or some companies use like Google Suite, G Suite for theirs. It's not required, but it's like the main way to chat. So that's what we use, and it's just kind of interesting to like. There's no reason not to use it. So you can't have Zoom on your laptop. There are some apps that we cannot have on our laptops. All of our software has to be heavily vetted for privacy and security before getting put onto our laptops. Zoom, they just recommend not having, and we have Google Video Chat, so there isn't like a need for another one. But I do have Snapchat camera on my work laptop, and somehow that one's okay. So who knows? It also like Mac OS update. I have a Mac that I work on for work that I use for programming. We can't get the updates as fast as they come out. We have to get them like run through security and privacy before we are allowed to download the updates.
Are those your own laptops or are they ones that Google gave you?
They're ones that Google gave us. So I'll have to give it back if I ever leave. But so they gave us a laptop. You get to choose your laptop. There's no like standard Google laptop. The default is a Pixelbook, I believe. So if you have no preference, they'll just give you one of those. And our workstations are Linux. So when I'm in the office, I'll have like a full workstation, not just a laptop with monitors. And then they did give us a work from home budget. So we got to kind of build out our work from home office area while we work from home for over a year at that point. I got a desk, a standing desk. I have 2 monitors, keyboard, all the stuff. Is there a limit to how nice a laptop you can request? You can if you can justify it, you can get it. So, no, my manager when I was starting said you should get the 15 or 16 inch like Mac laptop because you might program the iOS app, but it's also just nice to have the big screen. If you can have a business justification, you could get it. That's usually the standard for most things that you can request.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Renee. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to help us out and answer all our questions. So thank you very much.
Yes.